All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Billy D's podcast. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here, as I always am. If this is your first time here, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. You can find the Billy D's podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with friends over at Good Pods, all those places. On the studio line with me today, her author name is McDaniel. Her name is Kathy. Kathy is on the studio line. Welcome to the program, Kathy. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thanks, Billy. I'm happy to be here.
All right, very good. Kathy is an author, and the book is entitled Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat. And every once in a while, there's a lot of cliches in the podcast interview business. People always say, how many times have you heard somebody say, we have a very special guest? I try to stay away from those things. And when people say we have a really interesting topic, that's another one you always hear. But I got to tell you, this book involves, would you call it, what's the term, an after life experience, a near-death experience? What exactly is the term?
Well, it's actually a memoir, which means it's just a picture of my life before, during, and after a distressing near-death experience.
Okay. Well, I say this is interesting because I would be willing to bet that ever since human beings have been intellectually motivated enough to look up at the stars and say, what's this all about? We've all wondered, what happens afterward? Is there something afterward? I ran across an interesting study that showed that among Christians anyway, if they were given an option between hell and nothing after death, they would have chose hell.
Really?
Yes. Now that to me is the idea of being in hell forever is less frightening than just disappearing.
Wow.
After that, and I can understand that. I think we're all conditioned to enjoy our consciousness, enjoy our the self-awareness that we have, and that is very important to us. And the idea that it could just disappear after our life is over is not very, very comforting. So let's talk about, like you said, it's a memoir. It's kind of like before the experience and then after. We're not going to give away a lot of the details of the book, but to talk about you a little bit, if I just met you at a party and I asked you, what was your background like? What was your childhood like? Did you have a lot of brothers and sisters? Did you go to church? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my dad was in the Navy, so we were transferred about every 2.5 to 4 years. So I felt like I was the new kid pretty much my whole life. And that's kind of tough. I had a sister that was younger and a brother that was younger, and we didn't know anything else. So we went from the Midwest to the East Coast to the lower East Coast to the West Coast. And I guess looking back, I'm glad because I'm a Gemini and I get bored. So it was good for me to reinvent myself every time I would show up in a new place. I became a kind of a chameleon. But it was interesting. I never got bored.
Yeah. Were you a family like, was church important? Did you,
My dad was an atheist
Okay.
until he was shot down in World War II and his plane landed upside down in a battlefield and caught fire.
Wow.
There are no atheists in foxholes, as you well know.
I've heard that,
So
yes.
he called out. I said, God, if you are out there and if you can save me, me and my family will become Catholics. Well, some of the guys came out from the jungle and cut him out of the plane, drug him into a paramedic, and somehow he got back to Hawaii. And by God, we all became Catholics. So
Yeah.
that was the story that I was brought up with. And so we always went to Catholic schools. We always went to church on Sunday. Eventually, my dad was a reader. My mother gave communion. I didn't know any other life. And along with that was the understanding and firm belief that there were three places you could go if you died. There was heaven, there was hell, and there was purgatory.
Yeah.
Well, this nebulous purgatory was like hell, except you got out. And you had to remember another thing. The only unforgivable sin was despair. So these are things that I was brought up with, and I firmly believed in. Us Catholic kids got real good at math because we were always taught about these indulgences, right? So
Yeah.
you remember that you
Oh, yeah.
had if you did something really bad, okay, you could like rack up 200 days in purgatory real easy. But if you said a rosary, that was 300 days credit, as I recall. So you were still ahead by 100 days. And so all this kind of was always in the back of my mind that I had to, not that I was a terrible person, but it was seemed like it was pretty easy to go to purgatory and pretty easy to go to hell. So you wanted to keep that bank account up. Be a good
Yeah.
person.
Exactly. And I actually was raised Catholic as well. I went to one of those schools, and I was a young child in the 70s, so I was probably right at the end of that real strict discipline era. Where you had the nuns had the rulers and the sticks and crack your knuckles.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was probably right at the end of that. You wouldn't dare do that now. But
No.
no, no. We wouldn't want to discipline a child, God forbid. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
but and I understand. I understand the physicality is probably not a good thing, and I'm just making a little joke.
Yes.
But back then things were much more strict, and you had to keep your back up straight, and when you answered a question, you had to be quick and thorough, and you had to pay attention. You couldn't be drifting off and daydreaming and all these other things. And I know some people have told me in their Catholic background that there was a lot of fire and brimstone. Now, I didn't have that much in our parish. I think the love of Christ and all those things was stressed a little bit more. Now, maybe that's where I was coming in at the end of an era where a lot of that fire and brimstone was gone. But with all that being said, did you have a particular and in some and to be honest with you, I didn't fear death when I was young because I didn't. As far as I was concerned, I was never going to die. That's how you feel when you're young. But when you were younger, did you have any fears about death, or did you contemplate it or not, a lot? How did you feel about the idea of death?
Yeah, I was a rational kid, and so I upended the story of Santa Claus pretty early to the despair of my mother. So I was always questioning, and I did have questions, and they didn't really start till I went to college. Got
Hmm.
out from under the thumb of the whole Megillah that I was used to. And when one of the nuns said to me, well, during class, she was talking about something came up, and they said, well, Adam and Eve weren't real. That's a metaphor. There was no Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
Well, you pull that bottom block out from your pyramid and things start to teeter. So I went home and told my mother, and she yelled at my dad, we're taking her out of that heathen school. It
yeah,
was run by the nuns, of course, this,
yeah,
Sisters of Notre Dame. But that was the first time I really thought, well, if that's not true, then what about this and this? Now, the thing about death that really first hit me was my first child. She was a lovely little girl that was born, and she died 2 days later.
oh,
Now, I was always a person that, before I had that baby, I did novenas, I did rosaries, I did daily mass. I mean, I did it all to protect that child, and then to have her die, and it was a pretty bad death. Um, it kind of made me shake my fist at God and said, "Where are you? And are
yeah,
you deaf? I've been." On your side this whole time. And what's up with that? So things started to get a little iffy after that. I felt like I was being blackmailed if I dropped my religion or something, that maybe I wouldn't see her again. So
yeah.
it was not an easy thing.
Yeah. And you're not alone in that. I kind of believe with the people that I've known over the years that if you haven't questioned your faith at one time or another, you really haven't done a really good self examination into your faith or anything else about yourself.
Right.
So that was, that's perfectly understandable. So let's kind of lead into what happened to you. What was your experience? Was it due to illness or injury? What exactly came about?
I was asked to care for my former best friend and fiance, who we had broken up, but he was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. We were still best of friends. I still loved him, and he called me and said, "I got to see you." He flew out from the East Coast and said, "I've got leukemia.
Mm,
They can't do anything more for me here. We're going to have to go to Seattle and see about a research hospital. I need 2 caregivers. Will you go?" And I said, yes. I dropped everything and went to Seattle, found us an apartment near the hospital. He found another caregiver, and off we went. We were told, the instructions at the beginning, and this is what we're going to do, and this is the process. And it'll probably, count on 2 to 4 months, So he would get better, he would get worse. They'd change the treatment. He'd get better, he'd get worse. They'd change the treatment. This went on for almost 9 months.
okay.
At the end of that time, I was a wreck. The second caregiver had broken her foot. Now I'm taking care of her. There was no sleep. There was just trauma, and he died.
Mm,
53 years old. It was like, what?
yeah.
I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I was so run down. There was a terrible flu going around. I caught it
Mm,
in no time flat. I'm down at one of those dock in the boxes, and my friend took me in, and by the time they got there wasn't a pulse. So they threw me in an ambulance, took me to the hospital, put me on oxygen. I woke up, later, wondering where I was, why my family was there. And they said, well, your pneumonia went into ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome. That's lung
yeah.
failure. You got a 38% chance of making it. The only thing we can think of, this was 23 years ago, Billy. And so we were the guinea pigs for the ARDS people. They didn't know quite what to do. They said, well, just put you in a drug-induced coma. At least you'll be comfortable, and you won't be knowing what we're doing to you here to try and keep you alive.
Sure.
So we're going to give you white amnesia. That's going to put your brain offline. You won't be able
Mm,
to remember anything that happens to you while you're in this coma. And then hopefully you'll wake up someday. So,
yeah.
I mean, there was no other option. So they trached me and, wired me up and all that. And it went, I just went out. Now, it wasn't I just don't know when it was because I was in that coma for almost 3 weeks, but I woke up
Wow.
conscious. It was pitch dark. There was no sound. I had no idea how I got there or where I was. And there was nothing really for me to do but just kind of hang out. I didn't feel
Mm,
scared or anything. I just thought, now this is weird, But so it changed in that all of a sudden I started to see this reddish glow, like off in the distance, which I assumed was the sun coming up. But as it got lighter, it was swirling fog. It smelled terrible. I heard people screaming and moaning, and I thought, oh, this is not good. So out of the fog came this booming voice that said, "Do you know where you are?" My mind was racing, and all I could come up with was hell. And then this booming voice this maniacal laugh just echoed everywhere. Totally freaked me out. So I turned and I ran into the darkness. I just had to get away from that thing.
mm,
And then what happened was a series of segments. It's taken me 23 years to try and figure out what all this was. And it was so helpful to finally get a hold of the IANS people, 10, 12 years later and hear what other people had experienced. There wasn't too many that had the distressing. There's supposed to be something like 1 in 10 people have them, but they
yeah.
don't come forward. And there's two reasons for that. There's shame and there's fear. The first couple of times I said to my family or someone, I think I was in hell, the response I got was, what did you do to have to go to hell? Or it was just the drugs. It was a dream. You learn to
Yeah.
shut up. And thank God I was a writer, nothing published, but I always had writing. And so I
Yeah.
started writing this thing out and all the things that happens, the demons that I ran into, the situations I ran into. There was a bombed out city with these strange creatures and there was a road that I was on a lot of the time that was just rock, and there was just a bare horizon with the glow. And I
Yeah.
walked and walked and walked, frightened that something was going to come out of the dark at me. There was a terrible group of like zombie people that
Oh,
attacked me. Um, it was just unpleasant. Let me tell you,
yeah.
it was a terrible thing, and I just kept thinking to myself, I can't despair. I can't despair. I don't know where I am. I felt alive. I never felt
Hmm.
dead. I just felt like like I wasn't in Kansas anymore. I didn't know how I
For
got
sure.
there. But I knew if I just kept going, possibly somehow I'd manage to get out. Well, that didn't happen for a very long time, and finally, I was at my wits' end. I had gone through a terrible ordeal with these zombie people, and then this terrible demon woman took a bunch of us ladies through this snow for God knows how long. It was chest deep, and we got to this awful, it was a cabin, and we were made to
Mhm.
sit on the floor and wait for customers, and it was just ugly. And
Yeah.
finally I said to this demon lady, I've been here for a long time. It's particularly dense, and I don't know, is it me? And she says, oh, well, it's Christmas on earth, and that's always the worst day in hell. And that was the
Oh,
first time it dawned on me what was going on. And still a fighter,
yeah.
I started singing A Christmas Carol just to piss her off. And the other lady started singing with me, and it was Away in a Manger. And when I got to the part of, Away in a Manger, no crib for a bed, the little Lord, and as I got to that next word, it never got out of my mouth, she shrieked and jumped at me, and I closed my eyes. And when I opened them again, I was infused with this love and joy and bliss. Everything that had happened before was gone. And I was just swimming in this love. And it was incredible. It was, you can't describe it. So as that kind of the light kind of settled out, I looked over. It seemed like I don't know, it was some kind of room. It was white all over the place. And there was some big table on the side with a huge book that was open about halfway. And I thought, I was looking in that book, and I remember saying, oh no, that's going to be too hard. I want to stay here with you. And when I looked up, it was my friend, the one who had died the month before. And
Wow.
he's grinning. He looks great. He doesn't look like he's got leukemia. He's healthy. And I was so excited. And I thought, oh, he doesn't know he's dead. And he started laughing. He thought that was so funny. And I thought, well, I didn't say that out loud. He must have read my mind. And that must mean I'm dead too. And I was so excited. I was so happy. And he came a little closer and he said, now, Mary Kay, you've got too much left to do. And I felt gut punched. I thought, oh no, they're throwing me
Yeah.
out. I don't believe this. This is terrible. And I just started, saying no, 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 I'm no. And boom, I wake up in the emergency room or the ICU to another bright light. My family's there. I can't talk. I got that thing in my throat. I can't move. I weigh 86 pounds. I've got no muscle mass left. The doctor I overheard saying, well, we don't know how brain damaged she is, but she
Yeah.
probably won't be able to drive a car or work. I was 53 and
Yeah.
a little mad. I was a little angry about then.
Yeah.
So it did take me about 10 years, almost 12 years, I think, when I finally, through a series of synchronicities, found myself in an IONS meeting. And at first I thought, wait a minute, why is everybody talking about angels and rainbows and bunnies? And nobody had what happened to me,
Mhm.
and I didn't feel like I belonged there. But one of the people there said, uh-oh, you had one of those, didn't you? And I said,
Yeah.
yeah, I did. And he said, tell me about it. So he was one of the leaders. And it was very difficult because every time you tell that story, you relive it. And he finally got it out of me and says, wow, we need to hear your story. I was coerced into talking to the group. They were all fascinated. And over, a series of 10 years now, I was compelled to write the book about my experience. I have been grateful to only meet just a few of the people that have had like experiences. In the IONS group, I've started a distressing near-death experience sharing group. We've got several people that can now come there. I'm working on a workshop for the IONS conference next fall. I'm totally devoted to helping people understand what happened, because
Yeah.
here I am 23 years later, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that. But out of being with God, I knew that God is all loving and all forgiving, period, exclamation point. So why was I there?
Yeah.
I believe, Billy, that I expected it. I was born and I was raised in that with that idea stuck in my head that I would go to purgatory when I died. And if God didn't make one, then I had to make my own. And I manifested it. And I've heard other people say the same thing,
Yeah.
just because I believed in it. So the story is, God condemns nobody. If you want to go to hell, you just go right ahead. But it's not God that you blame. I had to give up a lot of the teachings of my religion. I'm a spiritual person now, and know that, and I'm here to tell people, you don't have to go to hell. Um, it is just, it's all good. Everything is good. I believe we plan our lives for the experiences we want to learn. And I don't blame God for things that happen to me anymore. I've picked them. And it's all going to be okay. We're all going to end up in heaven again. And I don't feel like a victim anymore. I don't think God's picking on me because I planned my life. And it's just a much lighter existence. And boy, I can't wait to go home again. I want to get all this stuff done so I can go home.
What's that group? Tell me a little bit about that group. What's that about?
IONS is the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and coincidentally, they started in Seattle 40 years ago. They're all international. We have conferences every year. There's hundreds of people that come from all over the world, all telling pretty much the same story.
Yeah.
God is all loving and all forgiving, and it's just going to be great. It's just us people that have the distressing ones that need just the guidance and the understanding to let go of that shame and that fear, because it was something that we needed to experience, to know ourselves and our beliefs better, to not just believe anything somebody tells us. I had to forgive God, for things that happened to me that I actually planned. And it's been an interesting road.
Yeah, and you tell the story so well. Just to remind the audience, we're talking to the author M.K. McDaniel. The book is titled Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat. How does the book tell your story? Now, you kind of mentioned it's kind of like a memoir. How is the book kind of laid out?
It's laid out from starting with my relatives and my grandparents and great-grandparents. I think we're kind of a product of our genes and our heredity, and I wanted to know more about them. So it's a memoir. I had to change, of course, the names of the people. I didn't want to get sued by my family. So it started off just kind of gently going back to great grandparents and all the things that made me who I am, and then to get to my childhood, and my family all had a sense of humor, a good sense of humor. So the book is not heavy. It just tells a family story, probably that most people will resonate with. That was how loud, that was like my Aunt Susie, or my brother was like that. It tells a very human story and about my upbringing, and I had two divorces. I was not, I was just a person, and to have that experience especially when I was trying to help somebody,
Hmm.
and then my health was gone, my job was gone, my life was gone, and then to come back and know eventually that I planned it. I was a brave soul. I planned to do that so that I could come back and save people the trouble of going to hell by giving them, skip the trip, people. It's not necessary. Um, Take it off of your agenda, and just know that there's a life review at the end of all of this. There is no judgment ever. You get to see your life review. You get to view it in two different ways. One is just like watching a great movie, and you're the star, and you see every single thing that happened in your life, and then they turn that around and let you experience that as the receiver of your attention and your actions, so that you actually get to feel how wonderful it was when you loved somebody. And you could also feel how it felt if you hurt somebody's feelings, if you stole something, the
Yeah.
ramifications. What did that cause? And it's not so much as a punishment at all. It's just, how did I do? This
Yeah.
was my plan for my life. How did I do?
Yeah. Very interesting. And I would say to the audience, whether you're a believer or not, someone's personal journey, someone's personal experience, to me always has value because it is part of our all collective human experience. And I always tell people there's what, like 7.5 billion people on earth. And whether we want to admit it or not, we all have a version of our existence that makes us feel comfortable. So there's 7.5 billion little religions out there. And learning how other people have experienced life and taken it in is, for one thing, very important. That's my first point. The other point is I've also interviewed and talked to a number of hospice nurses, and one of which told me she was an agnostic prior to working in that field. And there seems to be, and here again, I know it's not proof of anything, but I do find it very curious that there seems to be a consistency in what happens in those final moments. And it's hard to dismiss. And I wouldn't advise dismissing. And Einstein said, "Don't dismiss anything. You're setting yourself up for a mistake." And so I find it very intriguing. I find it very intriguing. Again, I'm going to keep saying the name of the book, Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat. You're listed as the author, M.K. McDaniel. We call you Kathy, but is that correct? Is that how you're listed as the author?
Yeah, that's the pseudonym. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah, you have to hide a
Yeah,
little bit,
yeah, yeah.
especially when your mother's 95 and she still refuses to read the book.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
Ah,
What you mentioned that it's not a book that gives a lecture or anything like that. It's just
no,
it's just your story.
it's
What
my
do you
story.
hope that the reader gets? What when the reader reads the book, what do you hope they take away from it?
That God told me to be loving, kind, merciful, forgiving, encouraging, grateful, non judgmental, and useful. That's all we have to do. And if you can't remember all that, just be loving and kind. Uh, the
Yeah,
rest of it doesn't matter.
yeah. That's a, that's an absolutely fantastic message. Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat by M.K. McDaniel. Now you're on Twitter. You're at M.K. McDaniel and then the numeral 3. That is you on Twitter. Where else can people find you online, and where can they get the book?
The book is Amazon or anywhere they sell books. You can get them. It's probably cheapest on Amazon if you get a Kindle. It's only $7.99, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and the website is the same. Is the name of the book with a .com on it.
Yeah.
And I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and anywhere that I can talk to people.
Well, that is fantastic, and I'm very glad that you chose to talk to us today because I really enjoyed this. This is the type of thing that gets me going. I'm kind of hard to describe. I wouldn't describe myself as a spiritual person, but I am very much intrigued by people's stories when it comes to this. Like I said, the hospice nurse conversations about the reaching up was a very common one. The other thing she told me was that they talk to people that are not there.
Right.
And it's the misconception is, well, they're delusional, but they're otherwise completely lucid. They know the weather outside, they know the time, they know what they've had for lunch, they know that you're standing there, and you sometimes feel like, why can't I see the person? It's so convincing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many things that are very intriguing about this kind of material, and I'm so glad that you came on to share some of this. And I'll say the name of the book one more time: Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat. And
Okay.
the author, M.K. McDaniel. Thank you so much for being here
Oh,
today.
Billy, it's been delightful. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you for listening at home. Just a little reminder, you can find the Billy D's podcast pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. And you can find me on Twitter as well, at Billy D's. You can tweet me anytime. You just have to be nice. That's what I always tell people. And they don't always listen, but I always tell them to be nice. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast, and we will talk to you again next week.